ready to challenge the sacred tunes. We're exploring the mysteries of musical hype, the 20 overrated albums in music history. Get ready for a controversial journey through the highs, lows, and downright questionable classics. We're off to explore sound. 20. Pink Floyd, The Wall. Now, don't get me wrong, Pink Floyd is a titan in the music industry. Albums like Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here are masterpieces, to say the least. The way their albums seamlessly weave together, encouraging us to experience them as a whole, is part of the Pink Floyd magic. However, when we talk about The Wall, things get a bit murky. Released in November 1979, The Wall brought immense success and catapulted Pink Floyd into a new realm of popularity. Mainly penned by Roger Waters, the album is a conceptual behemoth, exploring dark and bleak themes deliberately. Songs like Comfortably Numb and Another Brick in the Wall, Parts 1 and 2, undeniably stand out, securing their place in the pantheon of rock classics. Yet, here's where the division starts. The concept of The Wall, both musically and thematically, became a battleground for creative differences within the band. Roger Waters, with his vision of a concept album, clashed with David Gilmour over the band's direction. Waters, driven by a desire for a darker narrative, envisioned an album that resonated with the harsh realities of life. The impact of The Wall extended beyond the 70s into the 80s, marked by elaborate staged concerts and a film adaptation featuring Bob Geldof. Waters' performance of The Wall live in Berlin in 1990, with over 450,000 attendees, solidified its monumental status, occurring just months after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Yet, for all its historical significance and commercial success, The Wall doesn't quite hit the right notes for me. It's a double album, heavy with themes of bleakness and despair. While iconic tracks like Comfortably Numb shine, others, like Another Brick in the Wall, have worn thin with time, feeling tiresome and overplayed. Unlike other Pink Floyd albums that I indulge in from start to finish, The Wall isn't one that I find myself playing in its entirety. It doesn't make the cut for a casual Floyd playlist fix either. Maybe it's the heaviness of the concept or the overshadowing of some of their more musically innovative works. But I can't quite comprehend what all the fuss is about when it comes to The Wall as a complete album. 19. The Beatles, Abbey Road. Now, before you throw your hands up in disbelief, let's talk about Abbey Road. I know, criticizing anything related to the Beatles can be akin to sacrilege for many, but bear with me. The breakup of the Beatles is often mourned, but let's face it, they disbanded at the right time. By 1969, the Beatles' relevance was waning, much like Radiohead's in our present day. It's not about discrediting their monumental achievements, but let's be real, Abbey Road isn't quite the pinnacle we make it out to be. Paul McCartney's medley dominating the second half of the album may be fun, but it feels somewhat gutless in the grand scheme. And let's address the elephant in the room. The first side contains tracks that made Yellow Submarine look like a masterpiece. Yes, I said it. What makes Abbey Road particularly questionable is the Beatles' discography is a rather telling sign. The two best songs on the album were penned by George Harrison. That's right, the so-called quiet Beatle took the spotlight with tracks like Something and Here Comes the Sun, overshadowing the songwriting prowess of Lennon and McCartney. Reflecting on the musical landscape of 1969, pop music was on a vibrant journey in various directions, and the Beatles seemed to be missing the memo. The early 70s soul scene was flourishing, with artists redefining the genre. Meanwhile, across the pond, Americana was experiencing a renaissance. Bob Dylan's transformation with Nashville Skyline, the emergence of Graham Parsons and Neil Young, and Townes Van Zant's groundbreaking country record were just a few highlights. In the midst of all this musical evolution, where were Lennon and McCartney? Delivering Mean Mr. Mustard. Not exactly groundbreaking, right? Bob Dylan, T-Rex, and the Stooges were paving the way for glam and punk. The Velvet Underground, Nick Drake, and Scott Walker were crafting music so ahead of its time that its full influence wouldn't be realized for over a decade. Meanwhile, the Beatles were giving us a track that, let's be honest, doesn't quite stand the test of time. 18. Nirvana, Nevermind. Alright, let's talk about Nirvana's Nevermind. Released back on September 23, 1991, this album is often hailed as the triumphant return of punk or the birth of grunge. But let's pump the brakes on the hype train for a moment, shall we? Contrary to popular belief, Nevermind wasn't the groundbreaking revelation many claim it to be. It wasn't the first of its kind, nor was it the best of its time. In fact, if we're talking about records released on that very day, A Tribe Called Quest's Low End Theory takes the cake without breaking a sweat. Sure, Nevermind was a jam, nobody's denying that. But let's put it into perspective. Bands like the Pixies, Sonic Youth, Fugazi, and Talk Talk had already explored similar sonic territories, and some argue they did it even better before Nirvana burst onto the scene. What Nirvana did achieve, however, was bringing a certain style of music to the mainstream via MTV. Love it or hate it, they played a significant role in dethroning the reign of hair metal, which, let's face it, was long overdue. But here's the kicker. Along with their rise to fame, Nirvana inadvertently opened the floodgates for a wave of mediocre alternative music. Pearl Jam, Primus, Rancid, Creed, Soundgarden, the list goes on. Oh, and let's not forget about Nickelback, because, well, how could we? Now, don't get me wrong, not everything that followed Nirvana's success was terrible. Bands like Smashing Pumpkins, PJ Harvey, Weezer, and Radiohead emerged and delivered some truly remarkable music. But let's be real here, those bands probably would have found their way regardless. In hindsight, Nevermind might have caused more harm than good to popular music. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but sometimes the truth stings. Let's continue this conversation in the comments. 17. Eagles, Hotel California. It's time to take a look at Hotel California, an album that undoubtedly achieved monumental success. Released in December 1976, it's no secret that this Eagles classic sold like hotcakes, boasting over 30 million copies and trailing just behind their greatest hits 1971 to 1975. It got awards, accolades, and that massively strong single, the title track. But here's the kicker. Success doesn't always equate to timelessness. Looking back at Hotel California now, it's a bit like finding an old suitcase in your attic. Sure, it brings back memories, but do you really want to unpack it? The title track, with its iconic guitar solos, was once a crown jewel. However, over the years, it's become the victim of its own success, criticized for being overplayed and overdone. New Kid in Town and Life in the Fast Lane complete the triumvirate of hits. But here's the catch. Those are just the opening tracks. It's like the album front-loaded all its firepower, leaving you with less incentive to journey deeper. The remaining tracks on Hotel California might ring a bell for ardent Eagles fans, but let's be honest, they don't quite have the same magic as the big hits. They're the kind of songs you'd describe as fairly okay, solid Eagles tunes following the usual formula, but lacking the exceptional quality that made the band stand out. In today's music landscape, Hotel California probably won't find itself on many full album playlists. It had its heyday driven by demand and a couple of killer guitar solos, but an album of that magnitude, which doesn't demand regular listening, might just be a tad overrated now. What's your take on Hotel California? Do you still revisit it, or do you think its glory days are firmly in the rear-view mirror? 16. Michael Jackson, Thriller. Hold on tight, we're diving into the world of Michael Jackson's Thriller. Now, before you sharpen your pitchforks, let's get one thing straight. This album is iconic, no doubt about it. It sold more copies than there are stars in the sky, and it's basically a time capsule of the early 80s. Quincy Jones production? Mind-blowingly good. And let's face it, every single track on this album is etched into the collective memory of humanity. But here's the thing, being unforgettable isn't always a compliment. Sure, Wanna Be Startin' Something, Billie Jean, and Baby Be Mine are absolute bangers. Yet for every high, there's a moment where Michael Jackson takes a nosedive into schmaltz territory. And let's not beat around the bush. Thriller itself can be cringeworthy. There's something about it that reeks of Disney, although the video is still pretty epic. And don't even get me started on Human Nature or that unintentionally hilarious duet with Paul McCartney, The Girl Is Mine. They found their cozy spot on adult contemporary radio where they're played by CEOs in corner offices and yachts across America. Now, I'm not saying Thriller is a bad album, far from it, but let's call a spade a spade. It's campy, and the fact that it's often hailed as the greatest musical achievement of the 80s is a bit of a stretch. Have you checked out Prince's Dirty Mind? Now that's a masterpiece that puts Thriller to shame. And let's not forget about Janet Jackson. She's been making bolder and more relevant records than her brother without all the baggage. Control, released in 1986, predicted New Jack Swing and is way less cheesy than anything Michael churned out. And hey, let's give credit where it's due. Quincy Jones did better. Off the Wall? Now that's where the real magic happens. And if you want another gem from Jones, look no further than George Benson's Give Me the Night. It's a forgotten masterpiece, overshadowed by disco backlash, but trust me, it's fresher than anything Daft Punk has cooked up. So, in conclusion, Thriller is like that flashy celebrity you can't help but admire from afar. Impressive at first glance, but upon closer inspection, you realize there's more substance elsewhere. What's your take on Thriller? Do you think it deserves all the hype? Or are there better albums from the 80s that deserve the spotlight? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the discussion. 15. Kiss. Hotter Than Hell. Now let's take a look at Kiss and their album Hotter Than Hell. Now, Kiss built their legendary empire on the foundation of their first 3 albums, and no one can deny the sheer sonic power of tunes like Gotta Choose and the title track off of Hotter Than Hell. These songs remained a staple in the band's setlist for decades. So far, so good, right? Well, not quite. I'll tell you a secret. For an album that's supposed to be hotter than hell, the final master sounds more like it went through a journey in the underworld. The production is, to put it bluntly, questionable. If Kiss didn't claim to be the greatest musicians in the world, the production of Hotter Than Hell might make you question that claim. The band ventured into California for the first time to record this album, and something went awry in the process. The guitars sound like they're being played through a dingy radio across the street, lacking nuance and even going out of tune in a few spots. It's a production nightmare to say the least. But here's the twist. Half of these songs sound like they went through a musical metamorphosis when played live in a live. The forceful presentation in the concert experience gives these tracks a new life. Now, it's all well and good to say Hotter Than Hell featured the best Kiss tracks of all time, but it doesn't bode well for the album's legacy when half of the track list is outshined by its live counterparts. 14. The Doors. The Soft Parade. It's time to take a trip down the psychedelic highway with The Doors and their album The Soft Parade. Now, we all know that 95% of Jim Morrison's appeal came from his sultry swagger. The man might not have known how to play a single chord on any instrument, but his magnetic stage presence and ability to connect with the crowd during every Doors performance was nothing short of electrifying. However, every winning streak has its bumps, and for The Doors, The Soft Parade was one of those bumps. Sure, The Doors were known for seamlessly blending bluesy vibes with Morrison's poetic prowess, but The Soft Parade marked a departure from their usual formula. While the band tried to sprinkle in elements like jazz and swing, the result felt a bit uneasy. The breakout single Touch Me might have the lavish sounds that draw you in, but the rest of the album tends to falter. The epic finale of the title track doesn't quite hold up to classics like The End or When the Music's Over. When the Doors aren't trying to fit a few songs into a succinct package, things take an even stranger turn. Picture this. Robbie Krieger showcasing his bluegrass chops and channeling a parody of Bob Dylan in the song Runnin' Blue. Now, we applaud every band that takes chances, but just because the Doors decided to venture outside their comfort zone doesn't automatically make the results golden. What are your thoughts on The Soft Parade? 13. Self-Portrait, Bob Dylan. Let's dive into the enigma that is Bob Dylan and his rather puzzling creation, Self-Portrait. Now, when we talk about Bob Dylan, we're talking about a musical giant, an artist who's been dissected and adored throughout the history of rock music. But like any great artist, Dylan decided to throw us all a curveball with Self-Portrait. After surviving a near-death motorcycle accident, Dylan shifted gears on this record. He wasn't out to please anyone but himself, and boy did it show. The album, initially panned by Rolling Stone, raised eyebrows with its unconventional song choices. I mean, covering Simon and Garfunkel's The Boxer? Really, Bob? And let's not even get started on his rather modest attempt at Blue Moon. Now, Self-Portrait has its defenders among the Dylan faithful, lauding it as one of his most human albums. But let's be honest, it's flawed in ways that make you scratch your head. Dylan seems to be throwing musical spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks, and well, it doesn't quite get there. While Bob Dylan's iconic status would never fade, Self-Portrait did, in a way, prove to his audience that even a musical prophet isn't necessarily infallible. What are your thoughts on this interesting chapter in Dylan's discography? 12. Led Zeppelin. Presence. I'm very excited about this ride into the world of Led Zeppelin, specifically their album Presence. Now, Led Zeppelin dominated the 70s rock scene with their genre-defying sounds, from the folk vibes of Led Zeppelin III to the monumental Physical Graffiti. But then came Presence, and it was a bit like coming down from a musical high. After the epic journey of Physical Graffiti, expectations were sky high for Zeppelin's next move. However, Presence turned out to be the least captivating album of their glory years. It's filled with plain, bluesy covers and some experiments like Royal Orleans that are, well, only half decent. To add a twist to the tale, Robert Plant's car accident during production left fans straining to recognize his vocals, especially since he was in a wheelchair for some of the recording sessions. Now, before we get too critical, let's give credit where it's due. Achilles' Last Stand, the opening track, shines through as one of the last true Zeppelin epics, clocking in at over 10 minutes long. It's a journey that places the listener in the midst of a daunting battlefield where mythical beings engage in a final epic battle. Sure, Zeppelin would later give us a final hurrah with In Through the Outdoor, but Presence felt like the first sign that the Zeppelin magic might be running out of steam. What are your thoughts on this phase of Led Zeppelin's career? 11. Boston. Boston. Now let's have a look at the groundbreaking debut album of Boston, that self-titled masterpiece that brought a seismic shift to the sonics of rock. Tom Scholz, the genius behind the scenes, redefined the sound of electric guitars, giving us that searing mid-range driven euphoria that became synonymous with Boston. No arguments here about the sonic brilliance, but let's talk lyrics. Now, Boston's debut is a paradox, a musical marvel paired with some of the most uninspired lyrics of its time. Tracks like More Than a Feeling or Foreplay, Long Time boast breathtaking instrumentals, but the lyrics often feel like a mantra of rock and roll is cool, man. It's like having a huge smiley face drawn on the Mona Lisa, a bit too basic for the musical masterpiece it accompanies. Nevertheless, the instrumental breaks are the saving grace. Foreplay kicks off the album with a swirling effect, featuring a phenomenal bass line and clavinet duet that keeps things punchy throughout. It's a musical journey that showcases the true brilliance of Boston. Here's the most obvious fact: the offspring of Boston's influence. The AOR scene birthed too many toothless bands, and it seems like some of them might have misunderstood the lessons Boston was offering. What's your take on Boston's debut? Do you think the lyrics hold it back? Or is the musical experience powerful enough to overshadow them? 10. John Lennon, Milk and Honey. I think it's appropriate to take a moment here and reflect on the poignant posthumous release from the legendary John Lennon, Milk and Honey. We all remember that cold December day in 1980 when Lennon was tragically taken from us. Despite his absence from the rock scene for years, he was making a triumphant return with some of the strongest songs of his solo career, basking in newfound peace. Now, Milk and Honey feels like a collection of fragments, a glimpse into what could have been. Fans are divided on this posthumous swan song. Some hail it as one of Lennon's better projects, while others find his songs a bit rough around the edges. Tracks like I Don't Wanna Face It and I'm Steppin' Out showcase Lennon's unique style, but leave us wondering about the completeness of the vision. Here's the twist. Yoko Ono, often a divisive figure, stands shoulder to shoulder with Lennon throughout the album. Boasting some of her strongest songs and including demo recordings left by Lennon, she assembles a beautiful yet bittersweet musical tapestry. It's a collaboration that sparks both admiration and controversy among fans. As we delve into this musical journey, one can't help but wonder what Lennon would have thought about his songs being released in this state. Nevertheless, Milk and Honey remains a poignant remnant, offering us a glimpse into the unrealized potential of what could have been a phenomenal record. 9. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction. Let's kick it back to the late 80s and talk about a game changer, or perhaps the lack thereof. Guns N' Roses' debut album, Appetite for Destruction. Released in July 1987, it's hailed as one of the greatest first albums in rock history, sitting comfortably as the 29th best-selling album of all time. But hold up, is there really anything groundbreaking here? Now, Appetite for Destruction is often viewed as a collection of cool riffs, with Slash's guitar stealing the spotlight. Sure, the riffs are cool, but when you take a step back, it feels like the outcome of a weekend jam session. Remove Slash's guitar, and you might argue it sounds like any other hairband album from the late 80s. And if you're craving Slash's guitar skills, why not dive into Velvet Revolver? Better songwriting minus Axl Rose's whiny vocals. Let's talk cultural impact, or the lack thereof. Back in the late 80s, Guns N' Roses didn't quite create the stir you'd expect. Twisted Sister's We're Not Gonna Take It had a more profound effect, and the arrival of NWA's Straight Outta Compton a year later overshadowed GNR. Edgy? Axl's snake analogy seemed tame compared to NWA's explicit rebelliousness, especially with a track titled Fuck the Police. What's more, the retrospective worship of GNR seems a bit misplaced when you consider their minimal influence on those who followed. Rarely do you hear a new track and think, I sense some Welcome to the Jungle vibes. They came, they went, leaving us with a storm of pancreatitis and an unnecessary double album. Fast forward to today and GNR doesn't sound edgier. It's just 80s hair metal, no more, no less. So what's your take on Appetite for Destruction? Are we overlooking its true impact? Or was the hype just a fleeting illusion? 8. U2, The Joshua Tree. Let's have a heart-to-heart about U2's acclaimed album, The Joshua Tree. Now, U2 had this radical shift from being cutting edge to feeling like a liberal infomercial. And for many, it all went down around the time of this album's release. Bono seemed to reach a point of self-awareness, declaring himself the most politically important person on the planet. If you're seeking the raw essence of U2, the rebellious spirit that defined their early days, the first 3 albums are where it's at. But here's the thing, let's not jump onto the U2 bashing bandwagon. Instead, let's dive into The Joshua Tree, an album that often gets labeled as one of the most front-loaded records in rock history. It kicks off with a 3-punch combo that could rival any in the rock realm. Where the Streets Have No Name leads the charge, a rare song that genuinely aims for epicness and nails it. Then there's I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, a beautiful quasi-gospel piece with Bono delivering vocals at their career best. And who could forget the heart-wrenching With or Without You? But, and there's always a but, things take a bit of a nosedive with the rocking yet occasionally cringeworthy Bullet the Blue Sky. Still, Running to Stand Still manages to cap off the first half nicely. Now here's where it gets interesting. The B-side is oddly lacking in hits. The songs aren't bad, but they lack the punch of the first half. Trip Through Your Wires feels pretty basic compared to the initial tracks. Red Hill Mining Town seems half-baked, and Mothers of the Disappeared provides a somewhat limp ending to a record that kicked off with such lofty ambitions. Is it a bold strategy or a case of putting all the eggs in one half of the basket? The Joshua Tree is undeniably a great record, but many argue it falls short of being U2's best. 7. ACDC. Back in Black. Let's talk about a juggernaut that has been claimed by jocks, stoners, nerds, delinquents, and even teachers. ACDC's Back in Black. This album is so iconic that Nashville studios used it to test their acoustics. It's not just an album, it's a shared experience across different high school cliques. The title track alone features one of the most gloriously elemental riffs ever devised, the epitome of perfection, the ultimate rock jam. That riff, destined to be clumsily chunked out by teens testing fuzz pedals in God's own Guitar Center for eternity. Now, whether it's the best in AC/DC's entire career is up for debate. Can their career even be measured in units of particular albums? Or is it one long, loud, continuous mid-tempo guitar riff spanning 5 decades? Interestingly, Back in Black emerges from a poignant moment. As Highway to Hell was soaring internationally, AC/DC was mourning the loss of their lead singer, Bon Scott. The torch was passed to Brian Johnson, and against all odds, Back in Black became Bon Scott's replacement's best AC/DC album. But here's the twist. While Back in Black is undeniably great, it doesn't come close to capturing the essence of Bon Scott's contributions to the band. Many argue that Highway to Hell stands as the best album in AC/DC's arsenal. If you want the full AC/DC experience, some say you should pick up For Those About to Rock, a disc unlikely to soundtrack drunken cougars dancing at last call in a Chinese restaurant lounge. What's your take on Back in Black? Is it the ultimate AC/DC experience, or do you find more magic in the Bon Scott era? 6. Oasis. What's the story, Morning Glory? Let's delve into the world of Oasis and their iconic album, What's the Story, Morning Glory? Now, Oasis burst onto the scene in 1993 with their debut album, Definitely Maybe, setting records and blazing a trail in the music industry. But it was their sophomore effort that truly capitulated them into superstardom. Released in 1995, What's the Story, Morning Glory became one of the best-selling albums of all time, solidifying Oasis's status as international icons. With over 70 million records sold worldwide by 2009, it's safe to say they left an indelible mark on music history. However, let's address the elephant in the room, the critical reception. Despite its massive commercial success, some critics weren't exactly singing its praises. And do you know what? They might have had a point. Take Wonderwall, for example, arguably the album's biggest hit. While it soared up the charts, it's hard to deny that it's a bit of a dreary, mid-tempo strum-along. And Don't Look Back in Anger, while aiming for anthem status, might not hit the mark for everyone. Let's talk lyrics. She's Electric feels like it was penned in a rush by someone with a rhyming dictionary on speed dial. And don't even get me started on Champagne Supernova with its infamous line, slowly walking down the hall, faster than a cannonball. It's a couplet that makes you cringe every time. Now don't get me wrong, What's the Story, Morning Glory isn't a terrible album by any means, but does it deserve its spot on countless best ever lists? Some would argue otherwise. Even Noel Gallagher himself has hinted that Definitely Maybe might just be the superior record. 5. David Bowie, Let's Dance. Here's a look at the discography of the legendary David Bowie as we talk about his 1983 release, Let's Dance. Now, Bowie had an incredible streak of classic albums, but many argue that Let's Dance marked a shift in his career. Released in 1983, Let's Dance signaled a change for Bowie. Instead of setting trends, he found himself chasing them. Seeking a career refresh, Bowie brought in Nile Rodgers from Chic to assist with production. And when it clicks, it really clicks. Modern Love, for instance, is often hailed as one of Bowie's all-time greats, a pure, joyous anthem that guarantees to get the dance floor moving. However, not every track on Let's Dance hits the mark. Some critics argue that Bowie gets bogged down in lengthy jams that feel more like filler than substance. The 7-minute album version of the title track, for instance, is considered by some as unnecessarily long. Even Bowie's rendition of China Girl, a song co-written with Iggy Pop, doesn't quite match up to the former Stooges version. Cat People, on the other hand, stands out as a hugely enjoyable camp cut, showcasing Bowie's venture into icy synth rock. While Let's Dance may not be a dud, it's often seen as a departure from Bowie's trend-setting days in the 70s. It's important to note that Bowie had set the bar high for himself by constantly reinventing the game throughout the 70s. Let's Dance might be considered a good album, but some argue it's his weakest in a 13-year span. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you see it, Bowie's career had more twists and turns to come. What are your thoughts on Let's Dance? 4. The Replacements, Let It Be. Hey, music aficionados! Today, let's talk about The Replacements and their third studio album, Let It Be. Now, it's not uncommon for punk bands to face criticism when they decide to explore different genres and extend their musical reach. The Replacements, in this case, took a bold step forward with Let It Be, and they deserve praise for that. Released at a time when the punk rock community could be rather unforgiving about bands exploring beyond the three-chord confines, Let It Be marked a departure for the Replacements. However, some argue that it feels like a calculated move toward commercial success, and, more significantly, a shift towards an entirely different sound. In fact, a considerable portion of the album might remind listeners more of a Paul Westerberg solo record than the raw and raucous Mats of their early days. Tracks like the opener, I Will Dare, and its follow-up, Favorite Thing, are drenched in radio-friendly gloss, featuring bop-along riffs and uplifting melodies. While evolution is a natural part of a band's journey, some feel that the Replacements lost a bit of their identity on Let It Be. The band, known for their ramshackle nature combined with sharp songwriting skills, took a softer turn with this album. Now, Let It Be is undeniably a quality album, and at times it's even considered great. However, its enhanced critical reputation has been seen by some as a trade-off, where the band sacrificed a significant part of what made them great in the first place. As they rode the wave of acclaim, they gradually became blunter and less interesting with each subsequent album. 3. Fleetwood Mac, Tango in the Night. Hey there, music lovers! Today, let's delve into Fleetwood Mac's journey with their album Tango in the Night. Now, even for a band as resilient as Fleetwood Mac, this album marked a particularly challenging period. With Lindsey Buckingham out the door as soon as recording wrapped up, it signaled the end of an era for the classic lineup. Despite the internal turmoil, Tango in the Night managed to perform well commercially, producing several hit singles and earning praise from critics. However, beneath the surface, the strain within the band is palpable. The lush melodies and unmistakable quality of their 70s heyday seem distant. In 1987, Fleetwood Mac found themselves out of their comfort zone, attempting to navigate the moody rock landscape of the time. Tracks like Little Lies showcase Christine McVie's lead vocals, but there's a sense that she's grappling with the material. The titular track, penned by Buckingham, stands out as one of his more peculiar compositions, marked by an eerie spaciousness that perhaps reflects the tension within the group. It's almost as if they were giving their former leaders some room to work through his issues. However, when Fleetwood Mac returns to their comfort zone, as seen in McVie's Everywhere, the results are much smoother. Yet for a band renowned for soundtracking moments of pure optimism, there's a noticeable lack of confidence permeating through the album. What are your thoughts on Fleetwood Mac's Tango in the Night? Do you agree that the tension within the band affected the album's overall quality? 2. Radiohead, The Benz. Let's dive into the second studio album by the iconic English rock band Radiohead, The Benz. Released on March 13, 1995 by Parlophone, this album marked a significant step in the band's evolution, showcasing a blend of guitar-driven songs and ballads with more intricate arrangements and enigmatic lyrics compared to their debut album, Pablo Honey. Now don't get me wrong, The Benz is far from being a subpar album. Tracks like Planet Telex, Bones, and Black Star undeniably earned their spots in Radiohead's esteemed catalog. However, even among the brilliance, there are moments where the album feels like rudimentary rock in a less charming way. For instance, My Iron Lung heavily relies on the overused quiet-loud dynamic, and The Benz may come off as a bit dull. Sulk showcases the band's histrionic side without the sense of irony they would later develop in their career. The ballads, including Fake Plastic Trees and High and Dry, feature Thom Yorke's splendid vocals but may lean toward the shrill side, lacking the profound depth that Radiohead would later explore in their discography. In the grand scheme, the Benz is undoubtedly enjoyable, but it's not the groundbreaking inception of Radiohead's ongoing artistic streak. That pivotal moment would arrive with OK Computer, where the band truly found their unique voice and never looked back. 1. Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA. There is one iconic album that epitomized the 1980s, Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. Released in 1984, this record solidified the Boss's evolution from a folky to a stadium-filling rock sensation, marking a significant era in his illustrious career. Now, before we delve in, let's be clear. Born to Run isn't a bad album by any means. However, within the context of Springsteen's extensive discography, it's often considered one of his weaker offerings from the 1980s. The album's music tends to be basic to the point of blandness, strategically crafted to appeal to the broadest audience possible. Though misconstrued as a patriotic anthem, the title track can grate on listeners with Bruce's over-the-top vocals. Tracks like Cover Me and Dancing in the Dark are labeled as somewhat lackluster, with the latter considered one of his weaker singles. Interestingly, Born in the USA can be viewed as a deliberate response to his preceding and arguably best record, Nebraska, a stripped-back album that explored more introspective themes but unfortunately sold poorly. While Born in the USA undoubtedly contributed to Springsteen's colossal success and became a radio institution, many argue that his more introspective and less commercially driven material, as exemplified in Nebraska, holds a more profound and lasting appeal. What are your thoughts on Born in the USA? Do you agree with its placement in the context of Springsteen's discography? That's all for today. The top 20 albums that some might say are overrated. What are your thoughts? Drop your comments below, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more great content. Until next time, stay tuned.